I never planned for any of this to happen. If someone had told me years ago that I would fall in love with my sister's husband, I would have laughed, or maybe even felt insulted. But love, I've learned, doesn't always knock on the right doors. Sometimes, it slips quietly through the cracks of familiarity, wearing the face of admiration. When I first met Robson, he was already part of the family, kind, polite, and disarmingly genuine. He had that rare ability to make everyone around him feel seen. My sister, Eliane, was radiant beside him, glowing with the certainty of being loved. And I was happy for her, or at least I thought I was. From the start, what I felt for him wasn't attraction. It was something gentler, a quiet respect. I admired his patience, his calm tone when others lost theirs, the way he listened without interrupting. He had a gift for understanding people, as if he could sense when someone's soul was tired. I found myself watching him the way a student watches a teacher, learning, absorbing. He was different from the men I knew. My boyfriend at the time, Sandro, was good to me in his own way, but he lacked Robson's depth. Sandro liked loud music, loud laughter, loud opinions. Robson, on the other hand, spoke softly, but with meaning. He had a kind of elegance that came not from wealth or education, but from his heart. I remember one afternoon at a family barbecue. The sun was golden, the air heavy with laughter and grilled smoke. Robson was talking to a group of relatives, telling some story about his work. Everyone listened, not just because he spoke well, but because he made people feel. I stood at the edge of the garden, my plate forgotten in my hands, simply listening. There was something in his voice, warmth mixed with sincerity, that pulled me in. I didn't realize how intently I was looking at him until Sandro brushed his hand in front of my face, half joking, half irritated. "Hey," he said, "if you keep staring like that, you'll set the man on fire." I blinked, startled, embarrassed. My cheeks burned. "What are you talking about?" I laughed, but it came out thin, unconvincing. He looked at me, frowning slightly. "You've been watching him for minutes. It's weird, Marlene." That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my mind, not because they were true, or at least, I told myself they weren't, but because they made me question something I hadn't dared to name. Was I too drawn to Robson? No, it couldn't be. He was my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, my family. But once a thought is born, it doesn't die easily. Over time, I began to notice the small things. The way Robson smiled when he saw me arrive. The way his eyes softened when I asked for advice. How sometimes, when our hands brushed accidentally, there was a spark, a delicate, dangerous tremor that neither of us acknowledged. I told myself it was just imagination, that I admired him like one admires a good man, a rare soul in a selfish world. Yet, admiration began to feel heavier. It followed me home, filled my silence, colored my dreams. Sandro started to change, or maybe it was me who changed first. He became suspicious, jealous, defensive, and I became distant. Every time he mentioned Robson, I felt my heart race, as if my secret had a pulse of its own. One evening, Sandro and I were driving home after visiting my sister. The car was quiet. I could feel his irritation like static in the air. "Why do you always light up when he talks?" he asked suddenly. I turned toward him, confused. "What?" "Robson," he said flatly. "You look at him like he's the only person in the room." The accusation stung, not because it was cruel, but because part of me knew it wasn't entirely false. I denied it, of course, fiercely, desperately. But that night, when I looked in the mirror, I saw something new in my reflection. Guilt. It was then that I began to avoid Robson, or at least I tried. I sat farther away at family dinners, spoke less, smiled less. But love, or whatever it was, doesn't care for distance. Sometimes, even silence can be intimate. He noticed, of course. Robson always noticed things others missed. "Are you all right?" he asked me one afternoon when I seemed quieter than usual. His voice carried genuine concern. That was the problem. He cared. He always cared. "I'm fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile. He studied me for a moment, as if he knew there was more I wasn't saying, then simply nodded. That small gesture, that patience, that respect for my silence made me love him even more, and I hated myself for it. I started to pray at night, asking God to take away whatever was growing inside me. It felt wrong, sinful even, to feel this way. But the heart doesn't obey logic, nor prayer. It just beats, insistently, foolishly, hopelessly. Sometimes when Robson laughed, I found myself laughing too, even if I hadn't heard the joke. When he looked tired, I wanted to take care of him. When he smiled at Eliane, my chest ached, not with jealousy, but with the bittersweet realization that the kind of love he gave her was everything I had ever wanted for myself. That's when I understood it. Admiration had quietly turned into longing. It didn't happen in a moment. There was no lightning strike, no sudden awakening. It was gradual, like dawn breaking through fog. One day, I simply looked at him and realized, with both wonder and dread, that I loved him. And from that moment, nothing inside me was ever the same again. They say the eyes never lie, that they betray the soul even when the lips remain silent. I used to think that was poetic nonsense. Until the day I realized my own eyes had begun to tell the truth, I wasn't brave enough to speak. After that barbecue, Sandro's teasing turned into suspicion. His laughter, once warm and easy, began to sound sharp, cutting. I noticed it first in the way he looked at me when Robson was around. Not with love or curiosity, but with something darker. Jealousy, distrust, perhaps fear. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself he was just being dramatic, that he was imagining things. But deep down, I knew. My eyes lingered too long on Robson's face, followed his every gesture like a moth drawn to a flame. It wasn't intentional. It never was. But some emotions are too powerful to hide completely. It happened again one Sunday afternoon. My family was gathered in the backyard, sunlight spilling over the table, laughter bouncing off the walls. Robson was seated across from me, telling one of his stories, the kind that made even the quiet ones lean closer. He spoke with that calm voice, that subtle humor that made people feel safe. I couldn't take my eyes off him. Every detail fascinated me. The way he leaned forward when listening to someone, the little crease between his brows when he was deep in thought, the warmth in his smile. I watched him the way one watches a memory forming, tenderly, almost reverently. Then Sandro's hand waved suddenly in front of my face. "Earth to Marlene," he said, his tone playful, but his eyes weren't. "You're going to burn a hole through the man." I blinked, startled. "What? You've been staring at him for what, 5 minutes straight?" he said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You're hypnotized or something." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I wanted to deny it, to say I'd just been lost in thought, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I laughed awkwardly and reached for my drink, praying the conversation would move on. But Sandro kept watching me, his gaze sharp, heavy, as if he was waiting for a confession I'd never give. Later that night, as we drove home, the silence between us felt like a punishment. The air inside the car was thick, electric. Finally, he said, "You like him, don't you?" I froze. "What are you talking about?" "Robson," he snapped. "Don't play dumb, Marlene. You look at him like..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Like you wish he was yours." His words cut through me. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to insist it wasn't true. But the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't say it because I wasn't sure anymore what was true. "He's my brother-in-law," I finally whispered. You're being ridiculous. Maybe, he said coldly, but your eyes say something else. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I tried to remember every look I had given Robson, every smile, every time our eyes had met. Had I been that transparent? I thought I had hidden it well, that my admiration was quiet, harmless. But Sandro's words lingered in my mind, unsettling me. From that moment on, nothing felt the same. Whenever we visited my sister's house, I became hyper-aware of every movement, mine and Robson's. I avoided his eyes, afraid of what they might reveal. When he spoke to me, I kept my answers short. I laughed less. I made sure Sandro saw me keeping my distance. But even then, I could feel the heat of Robson's presence like a silent confession burning through the room. And yet, sometimes, despite all my efforts, our eyes would meet. It always happened in the smallest moments, when we passed each other in the kitchen, when our hands reached for the same plate, when I looked up by accident and found him already watching me. His gaze was never intrusive, never inappropriate, but there was something in it, a softness, a kind of knowing, that made my heart falter. It was unbearable, that invisible tension. I wanted to believe he was unaware of how I felt, that my love was my secret alone. But part of me feared, and secretly hoped, that he knew. Sandro's jealousy grew heavier with time. He began avoiding family gatherings, refusing to go whenever Robson was present. "I'm not going to sit there watching you drool over your brother-in-law," he said one day, his voice bitter. I remember the shame that rushed through me. "You're being cruel," I told him, though my own voice trembled. "Am I?" he replied. "Then tell me, Marlene, why do you defend him every time I bring his name up? Why do you talk about him like he's some kind of saint?" I couldn't answer, because in my heart, that's exactly how I saw Robson. Kind, good, almost untouchable. Eventually, the tension broke us. Sandro ended things one evening without tears, without shouting. He simply said, "You're not here anymore. You're with him, even when you're not." After he left, I sat alone for hours, numb. I thought losing Sandro would free me from confusion, but instead, it deepened it. Without the distraction of defending myself, I had to face the truth. I loved Robson, not as a friend, not as a relative, but as a woman loves a man. The realization terrified me. I tried to suppress it, to hide it beneath layers of denial. I prayed, begged God to take it away. But love like that doesn't disappear. It just hides, waiting for a glance, a word, a memory to wake it again. And even as I fought against it, some quiet part of me refused to let go. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw his smile. And every time I tried to forget him, I remembered how it felt to be seen by him, even for a fleeting moment. It was then I understood the truth my eyes had already spoken. This wasn't admiration anymore. It was love, quiet, forbidden, and alive. And though I tried to bury it, I could feel it growing inside me, patient and relentless, like a secret waiting to be confessed. After Sandro walked away, I told myself I deserved it. His words, "You're with him, even when you're not," echoed like a curse. I didn't fight, didn't chase him, didn't even cry that night, because deep down, I knew he was right. For days, I moved through my routine like a ghost. I went to work, answered calls, smiled when people spoke to me, but it all felt mechanical, hollow. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone else, a woman who had lost not just a relationship, but a piece of herself. I should have felt free. Sandro's jealousy, his accusations, the tension between us, it was all gone now. But freedom felt nothing like I imagined. Instead, it felt heavy, suffocating, because now there was no one left to blame for what I felt. The truth stood naked before me. I loved Robson. And that truth was a wound that refused to close. I started avoiding family gatherings for a while. I came up with excuses, work, headaches, errands, anything to keep me from facing him. I thought distance would help me heal, but the opposite happened. The more I stayed away, the more I longed to see him. It was absurd, almost cruel, how the heart rebels against reason. One night, I sat by the window of my small apartment, staring into the city's flickering lights. I kept asking myself, when did this begin? Was it that first afternoon when he listened to me talk about my job and said, "You're stronger than you think"? Or the time he helped my mother fix her old radio, smiling as if it were the most important task in the world? I couldn't pinpoint the moment. Maybe love doesn't begin. Maybe it just reveals itself when it's too late to stop. The guilt was constant. It lived under my skin, whispering every time I thought of him. I wasn't doing anything wrong, not in the physical sense, but emotionally, I was betraying my sister. Eliane was pure kindness. She adored Robson and often said things like, "I don't know what I did to deserve a man like him." Hearing her say that used to fill me with pride for her. Now it only deepened my shame. There were moments when I'd catch myself fantasizing, a dangerous thing, really. I imagined a life where Robson wasn't married to her. A parallel world where I could love him openly, walk beside him without fear or guilt. But the moment those thoughts appeared, I'd shut them down in panic. I'd whisper prayers, asking God to forgive me for what my heart dared to imagine. Still, the guilt didn't leave. It lingered like a shadow, showing up in the quiet hours, in the mirror, in my dreams, in the space between thoughts. I'd stand before the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, whispering, "You're a terrible person." Sometimes I'd even catch my own eyes and think, she knows. That version of me in the mirror. She always seemed to look back with quiet judgment, as if she saw everything I tried to hide. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, I returned to family dinners. Pretending nothing had changed became a kind of survival skill. Eliane would talk, radiant as ever, and I'd smile, nod, respond. But my heart would tremble every time Robson entered the room. He'd greet me with his usual warmth, a gentle, "Hi, Marlene," his smile soft and genuine. Nothing in his tone hinted that he saw me as anything more than a sister-in-law. And yet, that kindness, that effortless, innocent kindness, hurt more than rejection ever could. One afternoon, after lunch at their house, I helped Eliane clean the kitchen. She was humming, happy, glowing in that quiet domestic way only women in love seem to. "I don't know what I'd do without Robson," she said, her back turned to me as she washed the dishes. "He's my peace, you know." I froze. My throat tightened. I managed a faint smile, though she couldn't see it. "You two really are perfect together," I said softly. "Maybe," she giggled. "But I swear, sometimes I think you understand him better than I do. You two always end up talking for hours." My stomach dropped. She said it casually, even teasingly, but it hit me like a slap. I wanted to tell her it wasn't like that we just talked because he made everyone feel heard. But I couldn't. The truth was, our conversations meant something to me. Every word, every shared laugh, was a secret I carried close to my heart. That night, I went home feeling sick with shame. I stood in front of the mirror again, unable to meet my own eyes. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "Stop feeling this way." But feelings don't obey commands. They grow wild, stubborn, uninvited. Soon, guilt began to manifest physically. I lost weight. Sleep became restless. Every time I dreamed, I saw Eliane's face, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, but always there. I began to wonder if the universe was punishing me, if my love had cursed me somehow. And yet, even in my guilt, a terrible truth persisted. I didn't want to stop loving him. That was the cruelest part. My shame coexisted with longing. My remorse lived hand in hand with desire. It was like being torn between heaven and hell, wanting redemption but unwilling to surrender the sin. One evening, I visited them again after weeks of absence. Robson opened the door, surprised but pleased. "It's been too long," he said with that same warmth that once felt innocent but now burned through me. Eliane ran to hug me, unaware of the storm that lived between us three. When I left that night, Robson walked me to the car. The sky was clear, the air cool, the silence thick. He smiled gently and said, "I'm glad you came, Marlene. The house feels lighter when you're here." My heart ached. His kindness was both a blessing and a wound. I forced a smile, nodded, and drove away, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my hands shook. When I got home, I went straight to the mirror, my faithful confessor, and whispered, almost in tears, "I love him." And for the first time, I said it out loud. Not to anyone else, not even to him, but to myself. And that was the moment the guilt became real. Because once you name the sin, it stops being just a thought. It becomes truth. It happened on one of those Sunday afternoons that seem innocent from the outside, the kind of day filled with laughter, small talk, and the smell of roasted meat. But I've come to learn that it's never the big moments that change everything. It's the small, unguarded ones, a slip of the tongue, a glance held too long, a word spoken when silence would have been safer. That day, the whole family was gathered in the backyard. My mother was busy fussing over the food, my uncles were arguing about politics, and the children were running in circles, laughing in the golden light. Robson was standing near the fence, talking to one of my cousins, and as always, he had everyone's attention. He didn't even have to try. People were drawn to him like moths to a gentle flame. I remember sitting with my cousin Rose, sipping lemonade, pretending to listen to her story about a co-worker's wedding. But I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, or rather, fixed on someone else. My eyes kept drifting toward Robson. The way the sunlight hit his hair, the ease in his smile, the calm confidence that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't just handsome. He had that rare kind of presence that made you feel safe just being near him. And then, without thinking, I said it. "He's so beautiful," I murmured, half to myself, half out loud. The words slipped past my lips before I could catch them. The moment they left my mouth, my heart stopped. Rose turned to me sharply, her eyes wide, her lips parting in disbelief. "What did you just say?" she asked, lowering her glass. My cheeks burned. "Nothing," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. "I was just saying, he's such a good person. You know, kind, respectful." But Rose wasn't convinced. She tilted her head, studying me. "That's not what you said, Marlene. You said he's beautiful." I laughed again, too loud this time, the sound brittle. "Oh, come on, you're making it sound like something it's not. I was just admiring your brother-in-law," she interrupted, her voice edged with irony, because that's what it sounded like. The air between us thickened. I felt every beat of my heart, each one a drum of panic. "Rose, please, don't be ridiculous. I didn't mean it like that." But Rose leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen the way you look at him, Marlene. Don't think no one notices." Her words hit me like ice water. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her eyes narrowing. "You've got feelings for him, don't you?" For a moment, I was speechless. The denial rose to my lips, but it felt hollow, fragile. I tried to laugh it off, to shake my head, to say of course not. But instead, I looked away. And that silence, that tiny pause, said more than any confession ever could. Rose sighed, sitting back. "Oh, Marlene, I knew it. I didn't want to believe it, but I could tell. You're too obvious. It's written all over your face. Stop, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please, stop. She didn't. And what about him? Does he know? Has anything happened? No, I said sharply, louder than I meant to. Of course not. I would never do that. He's my sister's husband. I'm not that kind of woman. Rose raised her brows. Then you'd better be careful, she said coldly. Because if I can see it, others will too, including your sister. The thought made my stomach twist. Eliane doesn't know anything, I said. And she never will. I swear it. I hope so, Rose said, leaning back in her chair. Then, after a pause, she added quietly, just be careful what you wish for, Marlene. Thoughts have power, sometimes more than you think. Her tone changed, softer but unsettling. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked at me, eyes dark and serious. You said it yourself. You love him, even if you didn't mean to say it out loud. And love like that, when it's forbidden, it has energy. Be careful. You might not say the words, but the universe listens anyway. I stared at her, half angry, half terrified. You're talking nonsense, I said. I don't wish for anything bad. I just what? She cut in. Wish your sister didn't exist so you could have him? Is that what you're about to say? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping the floor. That's enough, Rose. She didn't apologize. She just looked up at me calmly and said, then stop feeding a feeling that will only destroy you. Her words haunted me long after that day. I laughed about them when she wasn't around, told myself she was being melodramatic. But at night, when the house was silent and my thoughts grew loud, her voice echoed in my mind. Be careful what you wish for. Because deep down, I knew she was right about one thing. I was feeding the feeling. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. I found myself replaying that moment again and again, the shock on her face, the fear in my chest, and beneath it all, an awful, unspoken truth. Part of me was relieved that someone finally knew. It was as if my secret had become too heavy to carry alone. But with relief came dread. Because once a secret leaves your lips, it's no longer just yours. It becomes real, alive, capable of doing harm. And though I didn't know it then, that single careless sentence, "He's so beautiful," would become the thread that fate would later pull, unraveling everything I thought I could keep hidden. That afternoon, I only wanted to express what was trapped in my heart. I never imagined the universe was already listening and taking notes. Some moments in life divide time in two, before and after. They arrive quietly, without warning, and yet they leave a mark so deep that nothing is ever the same again. For me, that moment came the day my sister, Eliane, died. It started, ironically, with joy. When she told the family she was pregnant, the house filled with laughter, tears, and celebration. My mother hugged her so tightly that Eliane had to laugh and beg her to let go. Robson stood behind her, glowing with pride, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. They looked perfect together, radiant, complete, untouchable. And I, standing there with a glass of juice in my trembling hand, smiled like everyone else. But inside me, something twisted. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was a strange ache. Love mixed with guilt, admiration tangled with something darker. Still, I clapped, I laughed, I hugged her. I even offered to be the godmother of the baby when the time came. She accepted immediately, saying, "Of course, it could never be anyone else." I felt honored and haunted all at once. The months that followed were uneasy. Eliane's pregnancy should have been a time of joy, but from the very beginning, something felt wrong. She tired easily, her skin paled, and she often said she felt weak for no reason. The doctors ran tests, prescribed vitamins, spoke in vague medical terms, but no one could explain why her health was deteriorating so quickly. At first, we brushed it off as normal pregnancy fatigue. But as the weeks turned into months, her decline became impossible to ignore. Robson rarely left her side. He stopped going out with friends, stopped sleeping properly. He'd sit by her bed, holding her hand, whispering things I couldn't hear. His devotion broke my heart, not because it reminded me of how much he loved her, but because it reminded me of what I could never have. Sometimes I helped around their house. I cooked meals, cleaned, tried to keep things light. Eliane always thanked me, always smiled. "You're my guardian angel," she would say. Those words cut deeper than she could imagine. How could I be an angel when my soul was drowning in guilt? Every night, I prayed for her recovery, not only because I loved her, but because I feared what her suffering might mean. Rose's voice echoed in my head, the one warning she had left me with. "Be careful what you wish for, Marlene. Thoughts have power." At first, I dismissed it, but as Eliane's condition worsened, that warning turned into a haunting refrain. What if, on some unconscious level, I had wished this into being? What if the universe had misheard my longing as a request and decided to make room for it? The thought was unbearable, and yet I couldn't silence it. The day it happened began like any other, gray and quiet. Robson called early in the morning, his voice trembling. "She's not well," he said. "We're going to the hospital. Pray for her, please." I ran there as fast as I could. The hospital smell, antiseptic and metallic, hit me like a wave. The family was already gathered, faces pale, eyes swollen. Through the glass window of the maternity ward, I could see doctors rushing, nurses whispering, machines beeping. Then time began to slow. I remember my mother clutching her rosary, whispering prayers through tears. Robson stood still, as if turned to stone, his face drained of life. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I can't tell. And then the doctor came out. He removed his mask, and I knew before he spoke. Eliane was gone. They said the baby survived, a miracle they called it, but miracles often come wrapped in tragedy. I didn't cry immediately. I just stood there, cold and still, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Around me, people sobbed, screamed, fell to their knees. Robson buried his face in his hands, shaking uncontrollably. And I just kept hearing Rose's voice, soft and cruel in my mind. "Be careful what you wish for." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eliane's face, her smile, her laughter, the way she'd call my name. And then I saw her lying in that hospital bed, lifeless. My mind kept replaying the same thought over and over. Did I do this? Of course, reason told me I hadn't. The doctors had explained it, complications, an unknown condition, something no one could have predicted. But guilt doesn't listen to reason. It builds its own story, its own truth. And in mine, I was guilty. Not by action, but by desire. I thought about the day I'd told Rose, if they ever broke up, or if something happened to my sister. The unfinished sentence now felt like a confession. I hadn't meant it. I had never wished for her death. But what if the universe didn't understand the difference between wanting and wishing? In the days that followed, I helped take care of the baby. Holding him for the first time was bittersweet. He was beautiful, so fragile, with Eliane's eyes. Everyone said he was a blessing, a piece of her left behind. But when I looked into his face, I felt both love and torment. Because through him, I saw the price of my secret longing. Robson barely spoke after the funeral. He moved through the days like a man who had forgotten how to live. Sometimes I'd catch him staring into space, tears silently falling. And in those moments, I wanted to comfort him, to hold him, but I didn't dare. It would have felt like betrayal twice over. The house felt emptier than ever, haunted not by ghosts, but by memories. And every night, when I lay in bed, I whispered the same words over and over, to God, to the universe, to my sister's spirit. I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean it. But silence was the only answer I ever got. And that silence was worse than any accusation, because it left room for doubt. After Eliane's death, the world became quieter, not in the peaceful way, but in that heavy silence that follows a storm. Everything seemed to move in slow motion, as if life itself was mourning her. The house where laughter once echoed now felt like a sacred tomb. Every object, a cup, a scarf, a photograph, carried the weight of her absence. Robson tried to be strong, for the baby's sake, for the family's sake, but his eyes told a different story. There was a void behind them, a kind of emptiness that no sleep, no prayer could fill. And maybe that's what drew me even closer to him. Grief made us orbit around the same pain. It gave us a language that no one else could understand. At first it was simple. I came by to help, to cook, to clean, to take care of the baby. Everyone said it was the right thing to do, that he needed support, that the baby needed a woman's presence around. And I believed that. Or at least, I wanted to. But love has a way of disguising itself as kindness. Each visit that began with practical reasons slowly turned into something else. Sometimes I stayed for hours, rocking the baby to sleep while Robson watched silently from the doorway. Other times, we'd sit at the kitchen table late at night, cups of coffee growing cold between us, talking about everything and nothing. He'd ask me, "Do you think she's still around somehow, watching us?" And I never knew how to answer, because I did feel her. Not in the comforting, angelic way people describe, but as a presence that watched, judged, questioned. "Yes," I would whisper, eyes downcast. "I think she's still here." He'd nod slowly, as if that gave him comfort. But for me, it only deepened the ache in my chest. Because if Eliane truly was watching, then she saw everything. My feelings, my guilt, my silent betrayal. Sometimes, when the baby cried at night, I'd go to Robson's house to help. He never asked directly, but I could tell he wanted me there. We moved through those late hours like two wounded souls, bound by loss, pretending our closeness was innocent. When he looked at me, tired, grateful, vulnerable, something inside me both melted and broke. There were moments when his hand brushed mine as we passed each other in the hallway. Just a second, fleeting, harmless, but it was enough to make my breath catch. There was no intention, no plan, yet the air between us was charged, fragile, like a wire about to spark. And every time I felt that pull, I hated myself for it. At night, when I returned home, I'd stare at my reflection, whispering the same prayer again and again. "Forgive me, Eliane. I'm only trying to help him." But even as I said it, I knew part of it was a lie. Because somewhere beneath the guilt, love was still alive and growing stronger in the shadow of grief.
One evening, as the rain tapped gently against the windows, Robson sat on the couch holding the baby. I watched him from the doorway, and for a moment everything seemed still. The soft light, the sound of his voice as he hummed to calm his son, the gentleness in his touch. It was such a tender, fragile scene that tears welled up in my eyes. He looked up suddenly and noticed. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just emotional, I guess." He sighed, his gaze distant. She would have loved to see this. She wanted this family so much. His words pierced me, because in that moment, I wanted to say I love this family too. I wanted to tell him that his pain was mine, that I'd do anything to make it better. But how could I say that without betraying the very woman whose memory united us? So I swallowed the words, as I always did. Days turned into weeks, and our connection deepened in silence. We never spoke of love, never crossed the line.
but the tension was there, heavy and undeniable. When I laughed, he smiled in a way he hadn't in months. When he thanked me for something, his voice lingered a little too long on my name. And in those small, forbidden moments, I felt both blessed and damned. The nights became the hardest. I'd wake from dreams where Eliane was still alive, standing at the foot of my bed, her expression unreadable. Sometimes she looked sad, other times she looked angry, but she never spoke. I'd wake up trembling, her image still burning behind my eyelids. I started to believe those dreams were more than imagination, that they were visits, reminders, warnings. During one of those nights, unable to sleep, I walked into the bathroom and stared into the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't me, or not the me I remembered. Her eyes were tired, guilty, full of longing. "You're stealing her place," I whispered to my reflection. "Even if you haven't touched him yet, you're already taking her place." And then I cried, not because of what had happened, but because of what I knew was coming. Because love, once awakened, never sleeps again. The next morning, Robson called to ask if I could come by and stay the weekend to help with the baby. His voice was calm, but something in it made my heart skip. I said yes. Of course I said yes. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, my heart pounding, my mind a battlefield. I knew it wasn't just about helping anymore. The line I had drawn so carefully was beginning to blur, and part of me didn't want to redraw it. That weekend would change everything again. I didn't know it yet, but I could feel it. The quiet pull of destiny, the ache of temptation, and somewhere in the shadows, the gaze of my sister, still watching. Between love and condemnation, my soul stood trembling, knowing that whichever way I turned, I would lose a part of myself forever. That weekend began like all the others, calm, familiar, harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. I arrived at Robson's house early on Saturday morning, carrying a basket of groceries and a heart that wouldn't stop trembling. The baby, Felipe, was already awake, babbling softly in his crib. Robson greeted me at the door with that tired smile I'd grown used to, the kind that still carried traces of sorrow, but had begun, little by little, to let in light again. "Morning," he said softly. "You didn't have to bring all this," I smiled, trying to steady my voice. "You know I can't come empty-handed." He chuckled faintly, and that sound, simple, unguarded, felt like sunlight after a long winter. The day passed quietly. I helped with breakfast, washed some laundry, and played with Felipe while Robson worked in the garden. Every once in a while, I'd catch him watching me, not in a way that felt inappropriate, but with a kind of quiet gratitude, as if my presence somehow steadied him. I told myself that was all it was. Gratitude, companionship, nothing more. But by the time evening came, the air between us had changed. After dinner, the baby finally fell asleep, and the house grew still. Rain began to fall outside, soft, rhythmic, hypnotic. I was about to gather my things to leave when Robson spoke. "You can stay tonight if you want," he said, his tone hesitant. "It's late, and the rain's getting worse. I wouldn't want you driving in this." I hesitated. I knew what staying meant, or rather, what it could mean. Yet I also knew how lonely he'd been, how lonely I'd been. "All right," I said finally. "I'll sleep in the guest room." He nodded, but there was something in his eyes that lingered, a flicker of something unspoken. We sat for a while in the living room, listening to the rain. The lights were dim, the baby monitor faintly buzzing on the table. Robson leaned back on the couch, exhausted. I could see the lines of grief still etched into his face, softened now by the faintest smile. "Felipe's lucky," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "To have you. I don't know what I'd do without your help." I looked down, feeling my heart pound. "You'd manage. You always do." He shook his head. No, really. You've been my anchor these past months. You keep this place alive." His words warmed me and wounded me all at once. I wanted to believe he meant them in a simple, brotherly way, but there was something different in his tone, something deeper. I turned my gaze toward the window, where raindrops chased each other down the glass. "Don't say that," I whispered. "You give me too much credit." When I looked back at him, he was studying me in a way that made time slow. His eyes, gentle, searching, held mine, and for the first time, I didn't look away. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. It felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing that one more step would change everything. Then he said it, quietly, almost like a thought that escaped before he could stop it. "I don't understand how a woman like you is still alone." I felt my breath catch. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly, a mixture of admiration and melancholy in his expression. "You're kind, strong, beautiful. You give so much of yourself to everyone. Sometimes I wonder why no one's been lucky enough to keep you." His words hit something inside me I'd tried so hard to bury. I wanted to deflect, to laugh it off, but I couldn't find the strength. "Maybe it's not luck," I murmured. "Maybe it's timing." He tilted his head slightly. "Timing?" I nodded, feeling the tremor in my voice. Sometimes two people meet when they shouldn't, when it's too late or too early. And maybe that's the real tragedy. He looked at me then. Really looked. The room seemed to shrink around us, every sound fading except for the rain and the fragile rhythm of our breaths. His eyes were filled with a kind of tenderness I'd never seen before, and yet, in that tenderness, there was danger. "Do you ever think," he asked softly, "that maybe the universe makes mistakes?" My heart clenched. "I don't know," I whispered. "Maybe it just tests us." He leaned closer, his voice barely a breath. "And if we fail the test?" I wanted to say, "Then we lose everything." I wanted to pull away, to remind him, to remind myself, that love like ours had already cost too much. But I didn't move. Because in that moment, the space between us felt sacred, like something forbidden and divine at once. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. The touch was so soft it could have been imagined, yet it sent a current through me that made my whole body tremble. "Robson," I began, but the word dissolved into silence. And then, without warning, he kissed me. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, hesitant, the kind of kiss that asks a question before demanding an answer. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of coffee and grief. For a heartbeat, I didn't resist. I let the years of silence, of longing, of guilt melt into that single, impossible moment. It was everything I had dreamed of and everything I had feared. When he finally pulled away, we stayed there, inches apart, breathing each other's air, unable to speak. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the windows like a pulse. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I shouldn't have." I shook my head before he could finish. "Don't," I said softly. "Don't apologize." And yet, even as I said it, tears welled in my eyes, because I knew what this meant. There was no going back. The silence that had protected us, suffocated us, had finally broken. And in its place came something terrifyingly real. He took my hands gently, his eyes filled with sorrow and something else, love, perhaps, or maybe the reflection of mine. "I don't know what happens now," he said. "Neither do I admitted, my voice trembling. "But whatever it is, it's already happening." That night, when I finally went to the guest room, I lay awake, listening to the rain. My lips still tingled where his had touched them. My heart raced with a mix of bliss and terror. I had dreamed of that kiss for so long, but I never imagined how heavy it would feel. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a door opening, one that could never be closed again. And as I drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought echoed through my mind like a prayer and a curse. Forgive me, Eliane. I couldn't stop it. The night of the kiss should have ended there, with two souls trembling under the weight of something that should never have happened. But it didn't. Some moments are too powerful to stop once they begin. They unfold like fate itself, pulling you toward the very thing you've spent your life running from. After that kiss, silence filled the room again, heavy, electric, alive. Robson looked at me as if trying to read what was in my heart, searching for regret, for permission, for something that might save us both from ourselves. But all he found was truth. Naked, undeniable truth. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him, maybe it was me. But the next thing I remember was his hand reaching for mine, trembling slightly, his fingers lacing through mine with the kind of familiarity that made my chest ache. He didn't pull me closer right away. He just held my hand, as if testing whether the world would collapse if we touched again. It didn't. So, slowly, gently, he drew me into his arms. For a moment, I felt safe there. Too safe. His embrace was warm and human, and yet it carried the ghost of someone else. I could smell Eliane's perfume, faintly lingering on his shirt, the scent of her life woven into the fabric. My heart twisted, torn between love and sacrilege. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered, my voice almost breaking. He closed his eyes. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," he said, "except you." The world seemed to disappear around us. The sound of the rain, the ticking clock, even the hum of the refrigerator faded until all I could hear was the rhythm of his breath against my skin. He kissed me again, deeper this time, hungrier, as though all the pain of the past months had gathered in that moment, seeking release. Every part of me wanted to resist, to push him away, to scream no. But another part, the one that had loved him silently for years, wanted to surrender completely. And so, for the first time, I did. He took my hand and led me down the hallway toward the bedroom. His bedroom. The one that still held traces of my sister's life. Her photographs, her favorite blanket folded neatly on the chair, the faint scent of her perfume still trapped in the air. I hesitated at the door. "I can't," I whispered. "Not here." But Robson turned to me, his voice barely audible. "This house hasn't felt alive since she left. You brought it back. You brought me back." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did. So I stepped inside. The moment our bodies met, it felt as if time folded in on itself. The boundaries between love, grief, and longing blurred until there was nothing left but pure emotion, raw and aching. We weren't just two people seeking comfort. We were two broken halves trying to feel whole again, even if only for one night. He touched me as if afraid I'd vanish, and I held him as if the world might end if I let go. There were no words, no explanations, no logic, just the sound of rain against the window and the quiet rhythm of two hearts that had spent too long in silence. When it was over, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling. My body was still trembling, but not from pleasure, from the weight of what we had done. The room felt colder suddenly, the shadows thicker, almost alive. I turned my head and saw the picture of Eliane on the nightstand, smiling, radiant, frozen in a happiness that now felt like a curse. Tears welled in my eyes. I reached out and turned the frame face down, unable to bear her gaze. Robson noticed. He took my hand gently. "You shouldn't feel guilty," he said softly. But guilt was already everywhere, in my chest, in my skin, in the air I breathed. "She was my sister," I whispered, "and this was her bed." He sat up, his voice breaking. "She's gone, Marlene. She's gone, and she's not coming back. We can't keep living like ghosts." I wanted to agree. I wanted to believe that love could rise from tragedy, that maybe this was destiny, two hearts finding solace in shared loss. But deep down, I knew this wasn't love's beginning. It was its punishment. When Robson fell asleep beside me, I stayed awake, listening to his breathing. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, thick, oppressive, filled with unseen eyes. I turned to the window, half expecting to see Eliane's reflection staring back at me. And then something strange happened. The air in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable. A cold breeze brushed my skin, though the window was closed. The faint scent of Eliane's perfume, the one she always wore, drifted through the room. It was impossible, irrational, and yet it was there. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Eliane?" I whispered into the darkness. No answer, only the faint creak of the wooden floor, as if someone unseen was walking across it. I wanted to tell myself it was imagination, that grief was playing tricks on my mind. But in that moment, I felt her. Not in anger, but in sorrow. As though she was there, watching, mourning not her death but what we had become in her absence. I covered my face and wept silently. I didn't move until dawn began to seep through the curtains. When I finally looked at Robson, he was still asleep, his hand resting where mine had been. For a brief second, I envied his peace. Then I realized maybe his dreams were haunted too. I got out of bed quietly and walked to the living room. The baby was stirring in his crib, his tiny hands reaching toward the air as if sensing something unseen. I picked him up and held him close, whispering, "It's okay, my love. Everything's okay." But it wasn't. Because even as the morning light filled the room, the shadows didn't fade. They lingered, in the corners, in the silence, in the space between my heartbeat and hers. And for the first time, I understood that love and guilt can coexist, but only in darkness. That night didn't set me free. It bound me forever, to him, to her, and to the haunting silence that now lived inside that house. The days that followed that night blurred together like a fever dream. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The sun rose timidly, as if afraid to touch that house, afraid to shine on what had happened there. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, feeding the baby, folding tiny clothes, pretending everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Every step, every sound, every breath seemed to echo with a silent accusation. "You crossed the line." Robson and I didn't speak about that night. We moved carefully around each other, trapped in the fragile illusion that if we didn't name what we'd done, maybe it would stop existing. But silence, I learned, is just another way of confessing. I told myself I wouldn't stay long, that I'd help him through the worst of the grief and then leave, put distance between us, try to rebuild whatever was left of myself. But fate, or maybe guilt, had other plans. One evening, I found him sitting on the couch, holding a photo of Eliane. The baby was asleep in the crib beside him. The soft light from the lamp painted shadows across his face, and for a moment, I saw the man he had been before tragedy, gentle, kind, unguarded. Then he looked up at me, and something in his eyes made my stomach tighten. "Marlene," he said quietly, "sit with me." I hesitated but obeyed. He held the photograph loosely in his hands, as if afraid it might break. "You've been here almost every day since she died," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You've done more for me and Felipe than anyone. I don't know what I'd have done without you." I nodded, unsure where he was going. "You don't owe me anything, Robson. You know that." He looked at me then, a long, searching look that made it hard to breathe. I know, but that's not what I'm trying to say. He paused, swallowing hard. Then, almost in a whisper, he said the words that shattered what was left of my fragile peace. Stay with us, for good. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. What do you mean? I mean, move in, he said softly. Live here, with me, with Felipe. Be part of this family. The room spun. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. I stared at him, unable to find words. Robson, I finally managed. You don't know what you're asking. He leaned forward, his eyes filled with that same tender desperation that had always undone me. I do. I'm not asking out of loneliness, Marlene. I'm asking because I need you. We need you. You're the only one who makes this house feel alive again. His words pierced me. Not because they were untrue, but because they were exactly what I had dreamed of hearing for so long. To be needed, to be chosen, to belong. And yet, in that moment, all I felt was dread. I looked at the picture of my sister resting on the table beside us. Her smile, frozen in time, radiant and unaware, seemed to watch me, to wait for my answer. How can I live here? I whispered, my voice trembling. In her house? In her room? With her child? Don't you see what that means? He reached for my hand, his touch soft, pleading. It doesn't have to mean anything wrong. She's gone, Marlene. Life goes on. You can't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Not my fault. The words cut like a knife. If only he knew how heavy those words were for me. Because deep down, I had never stopped believing that somehow I was at fault. That my forbidden love, my unspoken longing, had set something dark into motion. I pulled my hand away gently. You say she's gone, but I still feel her here. Every time I walk into this house, I feel her. Sometimes I think she's watching us. Sometimes I think she knows. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're torturing yourself for nothing. Eliane wouldn't want that. How can you be so sure? I snapped before I could stop myself. My voice cracked, raw and trembling. How do you know she doesn't hate me for what I've done? For what we've done? He looked at me, pain flickering in his eyes. Because she loved you. You were her sister. She trusted you with everything. And I think... He stopped, lowering his gaze. I think if she could see us now, she'd understand. I shook my head, tears burning behind my eyes. You're wrong, I whispered. She'd never understand, not this. He didn't answer. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, the air thick with ghosts. Then, softly, he said, Please think about it. About staying. You don't have to decide now. I stood up, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. I can't, Robson. Not yet. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that. Just don't disappear, okay? Felipe needs you. I need you. I turned away before he could see my tears. That night, when I returned home, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the dark apartment, every corner echoing with the sound of his voice. I stood before the mirror, my old confessor, and whispered, He asked me to stay, Eliane. What should I do? For a moment, I thought I saw movement behind me. Just a flicker, a shadow. My heart skipped. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. Still, the feeling lingered. That strange electric stillness that always came when I thought of her. I pressed a hand to my chest, whispering through tears, If you forgive me, give me a sign. Please, I can't go on like this. But the only answer was silence. The kind of silence that feels alive, that breathes and waits. And that night, I understood that no matter what I chose, no matter how much love I gave or received, part of my soul would always remain bound to that request, and to the woman whose absence had made it possible. Because sometimes love doesn't set you free, it just finds new ways to hold you prisoner. Nights have never felt the same since that conversation. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore, not the kind that rests the body anyway. I close my eyes, but the darkness isn't silent. It hums, it whispers, it breathes with memories I try so hard to bury. Every time I drift off, I see her, my sister, standing in the doorway of my dreams, pale, distant, watching. She never speaks. She only looks at me, as if waiting for me to say something, and I always wake before I can. After Robson's request, I stopped visiting for a few days. I told him I needed space, time to think. He didn't argue. Maybe he understood, or maybe he was just too tired to fight for anything anymore. But even in distance, he was everywhere. In every thought, in every heartbeat, in every ache of longing I tried to suppress. I'd catch myself standing by the window, staring toward the direction of his house, wondering if he was thinking of me too. Wondering if he regretted what he'd asked. Wondering if Elian's spirit lingered between us, invisible but present, like a thin veil that neither of us could lift. The guilt didn't lessen with time. It grew heavier, like something that had settled into my bones. I couldn't escape it, not through prayer, not through distraction. My soul was restless, caught between the desire to love and the fear of damnation. I began to crave a sign, something that could free me from this torment, something that would tell me what to do. I wanted my sister to speak, to appear, to tell me if she forgave me, or if she condemned me. Either way, I needed to know. So I started talking to her. Every night, before bed, I lit a candle by the window. It became a ritual, my silent confession to the dead. I'd whisper into the flame, "Elian, if you can hear me, please, show me that you don't hate me. Show me that it's okay to love him. Just one sign, that's all I ask." The first few nights, nothing happened. The candle burned steady, the room stayed still. But on the fourth night, as I whispered her name, a sudden draft swept through the room, strong enough to make the flame flicker wildly. The window was closed, no breeze could have entered, but the air shifted, cold and charged. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Elian?" I whispered. No answer. Only the trembling light of the candle and the faint scent of her perfume, soft and floral, the same one she always wore. I knew that scent by heart. For a moment, I felt a strange calm. I took it as a sign, a fragile thread of peace reaching out from somewhere beyond. But peace, like love, never stays long. The next morning, Robson called. His voice was quiet, hesitant. "I didn't mean to pressure you," he said. "If you need time, take it. I don't want to lose you too." Something in the way he said it, too, broke me, because I realized that both of us were haunted by loss, each in our own way. He had lost his wife, and I had lost my innocence, my peace, maybe even my place in the world. "I'm not going anywhere," I said softly, though part of me knew it was a lie. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the candle from the night before, still half burned. I wanted to believe the universe had spoken, that the flicker, the scent, was her forgiveness. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a warning instead? Days turned into weeks, and I began visiting again, carefully, cautiously. Every time I entered that house, the air felt thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Robson tried to act normal, but there was something different in the way he looked at me now. His grief had softened into longing, and mine had hardened into fear. Sometimes we'd sit together after putting the baby to bed. We didn't talk about love or guilt or the night that had changed everything. We just sat in silence. Two people pretending that silence was enough. But every time our eyes met, the truth shimmered just beneath the surface, like a secret neither of us could bury deep enough. One evening, I found myself standing in Eliane's old room, the one that had once been filled with her laughter. It was quiet now, but the scent of her perfume still lingered faintly, as though she had just left. I sat on her bed and ran my hands over the quilt, the same one she used to wrap herself in during winter. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." For a moment, I thought I heard something. Not a voice, but a faint sound, like the creak of the floorboard near the door. My heart raced. I looked up, but no one was there. The room was empty. Still, I felt something, a presence, a sadness that wasn't mine. Tears filled my eyes. "Please, Eliane," I whispered, "I just need to know that you forgive me. I can't move on if you don't." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, humming with emotion, as if the air itself was holding back an answer. And then, from the hallway, the baby began to cry, a sudden, sharp wail that pierced the quiet. I rushed to him, my heart still racing. When I picked him up, he stopped almost instantly, his tiny eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned, but again, nothing, just the faint glow of light spilling from the bedroom. Yet, in that moment, I felt it. A warmth. A strange, comforting warmth wrapping around me like invisible arms, not threatening, not angry, just tender, familiar. And for the first time in months, I smiled through my tears. "Thank you," I whispered. "I understand." Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it wasn't even real. But to me, it was enough. Because sometimes the signs we wait for don't come as words or miracles. They come as a quiet feeling in the heart, the kind that tells you it's time to stop punishing yourself and start living again. And though I would always carry the weight of what happened that night, holding her child in my arms, I finally felt her presence not as condemnation, but as grace. If this story touched your heart, don't leave in silence. Tell me in the comments, do you believe love born from guilt can ever find peace? Or are some loves destined to remain unfinished? Subscribe for more emotional, soul-stirring stories about love, loss, and redemption. Share your thoughts below. Your perspective might heal someone else's heart. And if this story moved you, support the channel with a super thanks. Every gesture helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers of your soul